Thank you everyone for coming. I'm happy to be here. My name is Kaufman, and today I'm going to talk about the Austrian theory of the business cycle and how I believe we could use Bitcoin to transform the economy from such recurring booms and busts to more sustainable economic growth. So let's start by understanding how the economy grows, what it really looks like, this process. So as Manuel said, the division of labor is a critical part. Specialization is a critical part in economic growth, as Adam Smith also suggested. But I believe that the main driver for economic growth, also as Karl Menger said that, is the availability of capital for production. So economic growth, I believe, is all about the availability of capital goods, factors of production. From simple tools like this fishing rod to the more complicated tools like the huge vessels that we have today. The more capital that we have, the more capital goods that are available for production, the more productive and efficient labor is, and the more that we can produce as society. But in order to have such capital goods, those factors of production, we need to first take the time to produce them. That is, we need to use what Bauer called more roundabout processes of production. That is, first producing the capital goods, and only later producing with them the consumption goods. In short, it is like we need to move from short-term view to a more longer-term view, and longer our processes of production. So, for example, we can think of a primitive fisherman. He could either catch fish using his bare hands, just a few fish today, or he could first take the time to build a fishing rod and catch no fish at first, but later use it to catch much more fish. But how does a fisherman decide between these two processes of production? Well, he does that according to his time preference. In simple terms, time preference, as Professor Poliat said before, time preference is the extent to which a person values the present more than the future. So in our example, if the fisherman has a high time preference, it means that he values the present much more than the future, and he won't find the increase in productivity which a fishing rod could give him enough to compensate for delaying his consumption today of fish. But if it's slow enough, he will prefer to take the longer process of first producing the fishing rod and only later use it to catch much more fish. But while our fisherman is working in isolation, this is not the state of the market economy, which is about the division of labor. So how does this thing work in the market economy? Well, as people start saving more and lowering their time preference, it will affect the interest rate. The interest rate in the market is the reflection of time preference of people. The lower the time preference of people, the more capital there is to borrow from, and the lower the time preference of people will be, and the lower the interest rate will be. Now, as the interest rate is lowered, entrepreneurs can obtain capital much less costly. Capital is much less costly for entrepreneurs to obtain, and so production will become more profitable. Entrepreneurs will then start taking on more loans and use these funds to expand their production processes, to take processes which are more roundabout, of producing increasingly more complex processes. Sure. Yeah. So as the production expands, as entrepreneurs start taking more loans and use them to buy the goods that were saved in the first step, when people started increasing their savings, they will integrate the new saved capital into the production structure. They will use it to enhance the production structure and get the capital which was saved in the first step into the actual structure of production. This is how the division of labor works in the market, in a sense. And so as they start producing more, eventually there will be new goods available and greater supply of goods available, which creates kind of a positive feedback loop, in a sense, of people being able to produce and to save even more capital without diminishing their consumption, and use this extra capital to produce even more. Lowering their time preference even further, and so on. Well, but now how do we get from such positive loop of economic growth to the business cycles? Well, according to the Austrian theory, developed first by the economist von Mises, the problem starts when governments and banks start to expand credit. Essentially, in the present, they do so in various methods, quantitative easing or fractional reserve banking, which is practically insured by the taxpayers, or other accounting tricks. But the essential point is that they all bring money into the economy, essentially out of thin air. But how this new money affects the process that we just discussed. So as first, the credit expansion will reduce the interest rate. Since credit is more abundant now, money is more abundant, banks can loan more at cheaper rates without diminishing the money that they still hold. So the first consequence is that the interest rate will be lower. As we've seen, as the interest rate is lower, entrepreneurs will start expanding their production. Production will become more profitable for them. As they start, they will start taking out more loans and use them to buy capital goods. But as we've seen, the new money that they obtained was created essentially out of thin air. It was not because new savings were accumulated. No new capital is actually available, and therefore there will not actually be enough capital to match this new demand. So in a sense, there will be more demand for production goods, but not more supply, which will cause their prices to rise. And so as the prices of production goods start rising, entrepreneurs will have to take more loans in order to finish the production processes that they have started. In a sense, there is an illusion that there is more capital available than actually there is. It is as if our fishermen, if we continue our example, would try to build a huge fishing vessel while it doesn't have the capital to finish such production in his lifetime. He will essentially be wasting his time and effort to build something which will remain unfinished. And so when entrepreneurs have to start take on more loans, the interest rate will start to rise. There will be new demand for loans to complete all production processes, which will push the interest rate back up. This is when all the investments which were made during the boom period, during the period when the production started to expand, will be exposed as unprofitable. So, in a sense, the boom basically induced investments in projects which were unprofitable in the real interest rate, in interest rate which corresponds to the actual time preference of people. As there is not enough capital to actually complete all the projects, and this shortage of capital will become apparent, entrepreneurs will not be able to complete their projects. They will not have enough capital, and there will be massive collapse of businesses, and of course high unemployment, which is known as a recession. During the recession, all what Mises called malinvestments are liquidated, and capital left is either lost or moved to other more profitable businesses. In a sense, it is, if we continue our example even further, It is our fisherman realizing that his plans were unrealistic and stopping to waste his time and money on this, on the ambitious construction of a vessel, and actually moving to build something more realistic like the fishing rod. So essentially during the boom, all these malinvestments that are liquidated are basically curing the market from the expansion that happened in the first step. It is the readjustment of the market to real conditions of time preference of people. And so eventually, as all the malinvestments are liquidated and the capital is being moved to, according to the real-time preference of people, the economy can go back to its on the right track. The economy can continue again to grow, to actually grow and function. But it is, so how do we stop such business cycles? Well, it is true that we can we can delay the business cycle by returning to the first step and expanding credit even further. It is not possible to completely prevent it by expanding credit. Eventually, either resources run out or hyperinflation begins. So while central banks and governments now try to postpone such crisis, all they do is just enlarge the bubble which is created. They keep the illusion of more capital available than there actually is, and allow for the malinvestment to squander scarce capital for a longer time period. So what can we do? Well, the prescription by the Austrian economists is to try and stop credit expansion from happening in the first place. And this is where Bitcoin comes in. Sorry. Right. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So I believe that Bitcoin could actually fix this as well. First of all, Bitcoin is non-inflationary. It is limited to 21 million units, as you know, and it is produced by proof of work. So essentially nothing out of thin air. This limits the inflation in the M0 supply, in the base supply of money, and prevents credit expansion from beginning in those levels, which is the first critical task to stop the credit expansion at all. Yes. Yes, sure. So as Bitcoin is non-inflationary, it is created by proof of work and is limited to 21 million units. There is no inflation of the base layer. There's no credit expansion in the, there's no monetary inflation in the first step. There's no lender of last resort available. It forces rigidity in the money supply, in the base money supply. And so, second point.
So, may I ask you, so if we're talking about the trillions of issuance of bonds, which is credit, right? So, is Bitcoin able to supply this without inflation?
Yes, short answer is yes, but I will return to that later, okay?
We will have a Q&A later, or during the dinner, we can discuss this in more detail. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. So the next point is that Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer cash, electronic cash system, as Satoshi called it in the white paper. This means that there's no necessary intermediaries in order to send and receive payments in Bitcoin. You don't have to rely on banks or other institutions in order to send Bitcoin anywhere in the world. This allows for much clearer separation of cash which is used for payments and cash which is intended for lending, for investments. And allows more control of the people over their own funds and limits the power of banks to expand credit irresponsibly. So the last point is that Bitcoin is a digital asset. And as a digital asset, it requires much less it benefits much less from centralization of ownership over it. So Bitcoin, unlike gold, doesn't benefit that much from having such a huge Fort Knox, for example. It reduces the barriers of entrance for competition in banking for Bitcoin, which I believe could, in addition to Bitcoin having no lender of last resort, I believe this could force banks to be much more responsible with credit expansion and limit their ability to cause such booms and busts. Yeah. But so how can we achieve such a transition, such a system? Well, first we have a few obstacles. Sorry, it's wrong slides. So first we have few obstacles. I'm talking about mostly some politicians, central bankers, and economists. So there is no it is not important right now to deal with why these people like Professor Krugman think that Bitcoin is evil. This is irrelevant for us right now. The only important thing to note is that they will not adopt Bitcoin on their own. They will not allow Bitcoin to be part of the present financial system. And so the good news is that Bitcoin doesn't ask for permission. It's already there. It doesn't wait for politicians or central bankers to approve it or to integrate it. It's already available for everybody to use. And so as, for example, Congressman Patrick McHenry said, Bitcoin is an unstoppable force. It is something outside of the present financial system, which allows companies today to start building a new infrastructure. This is just a small example of such companies. But it allows businesses and individuals to start a parallel financial system, which does not depend on the present one. Sorry. So I believe that, of course, this change to such a new system, such a young system also, cannot be an immediate change. Nobody should expect Bitcoin to just serve everybody right now, I believe. But this transition can be done very gradually. So already now there are many businesses that start accepting very small amounts of their entire transactions in Bitcoin. They don't rely on it for everything, but they already start interacting with it. There are already many individuals that put a fraction of their incomes and fraction of their savings into it. And it is already, the change has already begun, I believe. And as, again, as McHenry said, it is an unstoppable change, an unstoppable force. Sorry. Yeah, so I believe that the last thing I want to say is that my hope for the future, for all this change, for all this new system, is to change public opinion, to care more about political and financial freedom, and more on our subject here, on the business cycle. I believe that Bitcoin could change the public opinion that there is a so-called inherent tendency in the market economy for such booms and busts. I believe that Bitcoin could prove to people that a free market money, a free market competition for money is both beneficial and allows for much more sustainable economic growth. So thank you, everyone. And are there any questions?
Yes. Thank you. Very nice. Yes, we had a few questions already during the talk. Yeah. Would you like to catch up with this?
Would you like to
with your question? Perfect. Any more questions here? Wait, I have a microphone.
Concerning inflation, it's right, you have a limited amount of bitcoins, so this is not inflationary, but you are importing inflation from the real money into Bitcoin, assuming that the exchange rate stays the same, and the US dollar, for example, has 5% inflation. Also, Bitcoin has 5% inflation, so there
Yes.
are inflationary effects.
Well,
As long as
this is-
Bitcoin is not accepted as a payment system.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't think that, well, right, assuming that inflation from the price doesn't change, there will be inflation price, but I don't see any reason to believe that the price will not change. I mean, the price is changing constantly. I don't see why it shouldn't match the actual inflation. But again, I think that Bitcoin, if we go to volatility, I believe that it will be much less volatile as it goes more and more mainstream and have more and more users. But I also believe that it is counting for the inflation of the national currencies.
Very good. One more question,
other?
or okay, perfect. Thank you, Ben.
Okay,
That was
thank you very much.
Really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.